So Tom, we've done a bunch around the kind of theory of the Solo taxonomy, its purpose, really trying to understand some of the language. Now we're going to take a brief overview, we're going to have a really brief overview of some of the applications of Solo taxonomy before in the next chapter, we dive really deeply into that. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of those applications of the Solo taxonomy?
Well, hopefully everybody, you've had the provocation to start to think about how you can apply this within your practice already. You've had a chance to read through some of the resources already, and you're already starting to see how it could make a difference for you and your learners in your own context. But we've also got a couple of ideas here that we know will make the difference. We know that these are some of the areas that have within our own practice has certainly helped in terms of applying the taxonomy. So first of all, that on the left there, the idea of classifying is such a crucial thing. It is doing what it was built for. It's helping us to classify the complex learning outcomes that we see. So when we're experiencing learning with our students, we're able to make sense of those experiences. We can see an outcome, we can observe something, and we can then classify. We can say to ourselves, that seems to me to be something to do with the relational level of understanding, and then we'll be able to do something with that. So classifying the complexity is one of the core applications of the taxonomy. We're going to design learning as well, so we're actually able to use the taxonomy as a tool for design. And so we're going to be digging into this later in chapter 4 as you start to bring a lot of this together. But one of the key ways that we can apply the taxonomy is at the point of design. So when you're sat with your team and you're collaborating with your colleagues, when you're thinking about learning that's taking place in the future, when you're doing some programming or curriculum design, it's an excellent framework for thinking about where you're pitching or you're designing learning, how you're going to generate those really clear and strong signals of growth. Another one, of course, is just to understand the next step for that learner. Every learner is experiencing learning differently. We have to try to meet them exactly where they are at. The taxonomy helps us to make sense of that. It helps us to understand where they stand, where they are. Helps us to classify exactly what's going on in terms of their learning. And of course, then, if we have a better sense of that, if we understand that better, we can help them to make that next step. We can guide them. We can suggest something that would move their learning on. And so understanding what the next step is for the learner is a great application, is something that should help you to give clearer critique and feedback to your learners and to your students. Chris, maybe you could take that middle one about observing individuals.
Yeah, so I think if we think of the first hexagon there as classifying against an actual learning outcome, which we've kind of designed and pre-designed, I think for me, and I think it's just habit now, it's almost just a habit, is when I look at a learner, I am constantly kind of looking at that learner and looking at whatever they produce, whatever proxies for learning they produce, and classifying those, but really thinking about the holistic journey. So thinking about, is this a student, for example, who always seems to get stuck in the mud around a multi-structural level and really struggles to cross that kind of boundary into relational? Maybe I need to think about how I can differentiate, how I can scaffold a little bit more. So it's also it's not a taxonomy for classifying children, but it's just a taxonomy for classifying the kind of signals of learning growth they give you. And over time, it really helps you to build that narrative and a real deep understanding of how students learn, not just what they learn. I think if we keep going, there's a few tools which I love and I'm very excited to share in the next chapter, is really looking at growth ladders. So we're not going to talk a lot about that because we're going to look at it next chapter, but this idea of when is a rubric not a rubric, or when it's a growth ladder, when it's there for student agency, being really open and visible with learners about their own learning growth. And I think, again, we've got some great examples of how we can design powerful questions, which will move learning along. And then that all feeds into this part of really reimagining the feedback cycle using super precise language. And I think that, for me, is such an important part of this, is the Solo language, which you may look at and think, oh, it's actually quite kind of academic and quite difficult language. We agree, and we're going to show you some kind of different strategies to be able to break that down for students. But the important bit is that we do break that down for students, that we do encourage them to use that language to talk about their own learning, to understand their own learning growth. So we've got a bunch of applications here. We're really going to deep dive into them in the next chapter. But for now, this should give you a little bit of a taster and really, as Tom said, spark some of that thinking of your own around how you might be applying Solo Taxonomy within your own learning design.